Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Norbert Dotzenberg. I'm a professor at the University of Applied Science at Kleve, that's Rhine-Waal University, and I also have the honorable task to give some introduction to business administration. Now, let me begin with a warning. This is not a really deep introduction into business administration. This is not even all the basics. This is just the basics of the basics and at the very, very low level. So, really, for beginners or people who are absolutely not yet familiar with the field, so only a first glance, you will be expected to work yourself independently more deeply into the matter. This is just to give you a first impression of what it all might be about. And the important, or one important task naturally which you have, is to go and deepen your knowledge in the further course of your studies, and then naturally read, make yourself familiar with things in a more deep fashion. Some initial remarks, therefore, on literature, especially with management literature, so business administration things. You are well equipped with books everywhere in English language, so there should be no problem to get familiar with some good books on business administration, management, and all the things to the left or right of that topic. Just some arbitrarily chosen books without any evaluation or without ranking them, just naming some examples to get you started. Um, Business in Context by Needle and Burns from Cengage Publishing is recommendable. If you here see the cover with 7th edition, then naturally that does not limit you to the 7th edition. Always the most current edition naturally is most up to date. So if you can obtain it somewhere in a higher edition because the other ones, the older ones, are sold out, no problem. That's customary with good books. So buy the newest edition. Here, the first English book which I ever came across that was just arbitrarily chosen at the time, just by typing in business administration or so in Amazon, I believe, I came across Diaz and Shah, evidently US-based book, general introduction into business affairs, nice to read with some strange traits nevertheless. For example, here I learned from that US book that Germany is seen there as a socialist country, probably because we have a state-run social security system, and that seems to make us a socialist country. That would probably surprise the person who introduced that system in the 19th century, the German, Prussian, and Imperial Chancellor Prince Bismarck. Would have been strongly surprised that this turns him into a socialist, but one never knows. Apart from details like this, the book is nevertheless recommendable. And even under that aspect, it is recommendable because studying with an international perspective also requires that one begins to see that other cultures probably see and evaluate your everyday life in a different form or in a different way. So things which are perhaps regarded by yourself as self-evident, strongly conservative, and God-given are probably completely seen in a completely different way by others. And so, take a look. Pride, Use, Kapoor, Foundations of Business, also recommendable, no problems. This also just I came across. Looks nice. Charles Hill International Business competing in the global marketplace. Also classical introduction. No problem. Rather officially designed as low-leveled is Complete MBA for Dummies or other books from the For Dummies series. That series is usually claiming to be for beginners, but nevertheless it has a decent level, so recommendable. And one of the most serious aspects, naturally, whenever you read books and you are not a native English speaker, is just to get accustomed, to get used to the language. So read, just to read yourself into the necessary language skills. And under that aspect, read as much as you can until all these books bring your ears to bleed. Good. Now let's turn a bit to the real basics. So what business administration is all about. When you begin at the beginning, you probably begin to think about the term business administration. And I found out, whereas business administration is the usual term which Germans would use, Betriebswirtschaft, then other countries probably call the field in question a bit differently. So when one really begins to look through the most low-level sources, that is everyday knowledge, that is today usually Wikipedia. So I couldn't resist the temptation to open Wikipedia and look it up. Business administration is there defined in a very convincing way as administration of a business. Well, we will end up with a similar definition in the end. Now that does not yet really help people greatly. So then there are some examples. It includes all aspects of overseeing and supervising business operations and so on. And then examples come. Business administration is often combined with the term management. So we also have here a definition of management. Management or managing is the administration of an organization, whether it is a business or a non-profit organization or a government body. So management is here defined a bit wider than business administration only. And we even found, or I even found some years ago, again in Wikipedia, something about business economics. That is a field in applied economics which uses economic theory and quantitative methods to analyze business enterprises and the factors contributing to the diversity of organizational structures and the relationships of firms with labor, capital, and product market. Seems very exact, but if I were a beginner, I would probably have to admit no chance of getting a clear idea, because if I don't know what business administration or business economics is, then I probably can't do anything with the answer. It is something in the field of applied economics and uses economic theory that probably is explaining a car by a car and a horse by that is a horse. So could have been done better a bit. Managerial economics also can be found, blah. Very precise definitions. The administration of a business includes the performance of business or management of business operations and decision making. Something concrete. Good. Let's start our own ideas. You see, there is a big variation of definitions. And the first thing which one should know when it comes to academic discussions or academic work is, well, definitions are just conventions. So if you find several different definitions, there can be not a really wrong definition. You cannot say that a definition is completely wrong. Definitions are conventions, so you can only say they are useful or not useful. You can say they are generally agreed upon. That simplifies matters then if you use a definition which is generally accepted, or they can be a minority view, but a definition is just something which you agree upon with your reader or with your counterpart in a conversation. Important might be that you are clear, that you clearly realize that words can be defined differently by different people. So it greatly simplifies a conversation if you both agree on meaning the same contents by the same terms, by the same words. So speaking about definitions in the beginning probably helps. That is one of the reasons why I want to talk with you about what do we define as business administration. And thinking about the basic terms sometimes already gives you some nice ideas what it might be all about and what you have to be busy with. So, business administration contains business and the word administration. So, we should think about what a business might be. And in general, business is an activity which is meant to generate income. So, to make money, to get richer, not to spend it. There is very often in literature a distinction between business, that is where income is generated, and households. These are the institutions, the fictitious or the abstraction for institutions which spend money. So where consume is made, whereas business generates the money, generates income. Yeah, indeed we find that business is the activity of making one's living or making money by producing or buying or selling products. So any activity or enterprise entered into for profit. Profit is another word here for income. Yes, one might agree with that. Now, in my first approach to the idea of what might be a business, the opposite of a household, you see, I still left something out, because if we say business is an activity which is meant to generate income, then if you and me become an employee in the firm of somebody else, this decision to take up a job would also be a business, because we take up a job to generate income for ourselves. But that is not the usual understanding of what a business is. It seems to be that it should exclude being an employee of a firm. Where the employee works, that would be the business, but the business of the boss. So how can we sharpen our definition in a way that that becomes clear? Let's have a look on that. So we should include in our definition of what a business is that the idea of an institution should be there, of an independent entity, and not somebody who is just receiving orders from somebody else. So something independent should play a role. So probably an institution, because a business that also mostly implies the idea that this is not only a phenomenon which exists just for 1 minute, but is a bit more constant, so has a certain permanent existence for a longer while, or is at least intended to exist for a longer while. So you see how we try to approach our first idea of a business more and more to what we really mean. And this, ladies and gentlemen, gives me an opportunity to give you a first excursus on things which you need for your life, especially that definitions are important and how to write definitions or how to find them. First, you must understand the difference between a definition and a description. A mere description of something really doesn't help you. For example, what is a big animal? Now you might say an elephant and a crocodile. Yeah, so you just gave some examples, gave a nebulous description of what you described, what you saw, but your sentences would not help me to identify another big animal if I just apply your explanation to, let's say, a whale. So that's the difference. A definition is something else. A definition is a rule which enables the reader to find out what is meant and apply that to unknown cases too. So a definition sets limits or outlines the limits which allow you to decide what is still covered by the term and what is out of scope of that term. Yeah? So that's the first thing. A definition must be a rule which allows to identify what is meant and not. So not a mere description or a mere list of things which you combine with that term or associate with that term. That just would give you a nebulous idea, and that would not help somebody. The second thing is, whenever you communicate with others, that requires that you want to be understood. And one of the most fascinating mishaps which can happen to people is that they imagine that the things which they have in their mind as associations will be grasped and understood by others. That's not the case. So a definition must be made in a way that somebody who does not know before can afterwards, after reading your definition, have a clear and precise idea of what the term means. So if you want to define a term, or in all cases when you want to answer the question, always formulate your answer in a way that somebody who really does not know and asks you afterwards has a clearly defined chance and a high chance to have a clear idea and a precise idea of what you are talking about, so that you really convey knowledge. So if you try to find out or to form an opinion about the quality of an attempt to define something, then you must always imagine if you were a complete idiot. And especially for me, that's never difficult to imagine. Now imagine if you were a complete idiot, could you misunderstand that explanation, that definition? Okay, good. Very often it is the case that if somebody really asks you, and after having studied, you will perhaps be for the other person an authority. So if these persons ask you something, they will take your answer literally. They will simply believe what you say, even if it sounds strange for them. And this is a big problem, because if you just express yourself in an inexact way, they will probably not dare to ask you again. They just believe what you said, and so tragedies can happen. Yeah? You must know that your first definition attempt is very often not precise enough. So instead of leading others the wrong way, you should try to imagine how you could still be misunderstood, and then sharpen your expression in a way that it gets more precise. Otherwise, tragedies can happen. A good approach for finding a definition, therefore, is make a first attempt to describe what you really want to describe, and then find out why this first attempt is still absolutely wrong. First question, what can somebody understand from your expression what you really didn't want to say? So what phenomenons or what things does your definition still cover what it should not cover? And second, which parts of what you really mean are still missing? So, a good strategy to find a definition very often is just begin with putting the thing you are describing into a bigger category to which it undoubtedly belongs. For example, if you want to explain what a provision is. Provision is a liability. Yes, provision is a special kind of liability, so that's safe. For example, especially for oral exams, that's always a good tip. You can always simply begin by describing to which general area something belongs, and then you begin to draw the lines which distinguish that specific item from all the other items in the same category. For example, a provision is a liability, yes, and it is one which is uncertain with regard either to its existence, its due date, or its amount, or altogether. So that is what distinguishes a provision from all the other liabilities, an aspect of uncertainty. And no, that seems to be precise already. And then you can check if there might still be things which are uncertain and a liability, but not a case for a provision, or if that's too much. So if there are uncertain liabilities which are not provisions, or if there might be provisions where uncertainty does not exist, my guess would now be no in both cases. But then step 3, try to illustrate what you described, define to the reader, so examples can clarify things. You should never begin with an example. The example can only clarify what you mean and give a concrete idea of what you abstractly have described to the reader. This is not necessary, but it might help. And number 4, don't forget that. After step 2 or step 3, ask yourself why your definition which you made up might be still complete rubbish, might be not precise, might be misunderstood, and take it for serious. Other people will believe exactly what you have said. So, yeah. When we talk about business, you will get used to that. Business is not the only term which is used in literature. You also find enterprise, firm, and so on. A huge amount of similar terms. In different academic works, you find distinctions. These people use terms like business or enterprise for different things. For example, I have got used to, when I speak about the taxation of enterprises or businesses, or business income, I have got used to using the word business when it comes to German income tax, and to enterprise when it comes to German value-added tax legislation, because that nice distinction shows you also in the words used that the definition of business in the Income Tax Act is not identical to the definition of the same thing in the value-added tax law. So different terms can make that clear. And yeah, in literature there is no generally agreed distinction between business, enterprise firms, and so on. So you will have to look into the introductory chapters of books. How do these people use the terms? How do they see differences? Or do they just regard all the three things as synonyms? You know, with definitions you are free. It's just a kind of convention. You also find terms like management here that the focus seems to be more on leading an enterprise, or entrepreneurship. Here the associations are a bit in the area of innovation, using opportunities, being successful first in a market or so. But that's not, again, there is no compelling standard definition worldwide. Nevertheless, when you look for business administration literature, also books entitled with the title management or entrepreneurship can be useful. Here I just made a photograph of a small little book, an introduction into entrepreneurship. A very short introduction, that's a part of the title. It's a series from Oxford University Press. Oxford University Press, that is a certain guarantee that the people who write there are not unqualified but highly qualified. And the great advantage is it's a pocket book, some 150 or 200 pages usually. The price is very affordable, and so Oxford University Press is always an idea. You cannot make things completely wrong there. So whenever you look for something which you can read over the weekend, or over some weekends most probably, then looking into something from Oxford University Press from that very short introduction series is not a bad idea. Good. Just to sum that up, to avoid confusion, it's always good to define terms clearly about which you are going to speak. Sometimes boring, but very, very promising. So if, for example, you want to write an academic paper later in the course of your studies, or at the end your bachelor thesis, and your paper then has a title like Tax Consequences of an International Merger, the first thing you should do in the introduction is think about what do you regard as tax consequences? What taxes are you going to speak about? Which things do you define as international? So what makes a merger an international merger? And by the way, what do you regard as merger? All these things should be defined, and that will start your ideas already. There are then many things where you come across and which probably you then want to write about. So starting with defining things is a good idea. Good. Now, sorry that I have talked your ears off. We have now just grasped the first general idea of what business administration might be about. Let's keep in mind and sum up. Business seems to be something, or is defined as some activity. No, as an institution in that case, which has the aim to generate income, and it should be an independent institution. So not an employee. Now, the other part of the term was administration. Now, what can administration be? There must be some behavior. When I administer things, I have the idea that I see myself doing something, and administration seems to be something active, not passive. And if I think about it more deeply, then I have the idea that I don't see myself just doing routine work, or might be, but that I don't only execute orders. It seems to be that administering something properly also means that you will have to take necessary decisions, yeah, to make sure that everything is properly done. In my mind, administration has the association of doing things properly, and so in the best way. That requires taking necessary decisions so that the business can perform well. So business administration might be the art of making the right decisions for a business. This is also a very simplified beginner's definition, but can serve our purposes to gain a first impression what it's all about. So the right decisions for making the right decisions for a business, or the art of making the right decisions, so the science or the academic discipline which deals with how one can make the right decisions for a business and what decisions have to be taken there. Good. Now, another aspect is in a university, even in a university of applied science, there is always the distinction between theory and practice. And in a university, you want to choose a theoretical approach to reality. So you should be aware of the differences, the pros and cons between theory and practice. Theory means you want to develop an understanding of things. Theory is from Greek and means you look on something. Evidently, you watch it with the intention to understand it. So the theoretical approach means you look at things and try to understand them, how they work and why. So to form ideas how things work. So that later you can have reasons for your decisions. Not only copying what you see, how others do it, just imitation, but trying to understand the reasons and the mechanisms which are behind. By the way, when it comes to academic writing, for example, how is a bachelor thesis written? What is the right style for citations? And so please also choose a theoretical approach. Don't only copy the habits of other authors. Think about the reasons why they do it the way they do. Think about the reasons why there is an Oxford style and when a Harvard style is adequate. Don't just decide for things without any reasons, and don't only imitate what others do. Try to make your decisions based on theoretical background, so on understanding and not only on imitation. So theory, yes, comes from the Greek language and means just looking on things with the aim to understand. So theory is trying to understand. You form an idea, a model, which you think represents the important aspects of reality. Now you must see that it's not reality itself. You cannot grasp every aspect of reality, so you just form a first idea what might be the relevant aspects of and factors of reality, and how do they work together to produce the effects which you see there. So naturally, when you want to grasp an understanding, your first model, your first ideas will be simple. Concentrate on the most important aspects. And then in the course of time, when you see your simple ideas of what's going on are not perfect enough, then you begin to watch again and you think about the differences between what you thought you understood and what happens outside there in real life. And then you try to find the factors which explain the difference between what you expected and what really happened. So theory is not something which is perfect in itself. It's rather an approach. You try to come nearer and nearer to real life. So it is expectable that your first idea of how things could work will be wrong, and that you then have to improve this idea by looking, what did I overlook? Which other things also influence the results in which I'm interested and the process how I arrive there. So that's very, very clear. To make that very, very clear, when you read something, a theoretical description, this is only an abstract model. Now, if reality does not behave in the way a theory prognosticizes this, this is not the fault of reality. Never believe a theory completely. Then you have misunderstood the whole thing. Theoretical approach, that's a learning process. You must admit to yourself that you are stupid. You only grasp a part of reality, and reality will always surprise you. So there are always things which you don't understand, which you did not discover or suspect to be relevant in the beginning, and that makes life interesting. To see my idea of the things was, it works this and this way, and then surprise, it works. Or even higher surprise, it doesn't work. So which additional factor can explain the deviation? In my abstract model, everything was fine. So where is the difference between what I imagined, between my world in my brain, in my mind, and the things which are going on in the outside world? And then your insight into reality gets deeper and deeper, because then you see what all the missing factors do, and if you can really afford to overlook them. Naturally, when you deal as a beginner with things, you start with the very low-level theoretical approaches, and only when you are familiar with them, probably then you go deeper, and then you find out, oh, theoretical model relies on some assumptions. And all these assumptions are not fulfilled in real life. I never thought about that. I just learned the theorems, but not the assumptions. So I was always dissatisfied with reality. So sometimes you find out where the divergence comes from. So theory and practice, when you are a really good expert, then you know theory is what you look up, and reality is also made up by all the things which you overlook, and you can only extend the things, the factors, or your view in the course of time. So a good theoretician looks at reality and looks again and again and again, and always improves his or her understanding. You know something about the functioning of reality, but not everything. That's important. A good theoretician knows that he or she does not know enough, and tries to find out where he or she is still wrong. If you are satisfied with what you know and think, I studied now, I'm clever, that's a straight way to hell, a straight way down, because then you stop getting more clever, and that's it, and you stay stupid. Practice is the other alternative. Then you just know how things are done. It's just doing in Greece. And the interesting thing is, practice very often creates experience. So people very well know, who have practiced, very well know how things are done. And practitioners very often know from their experience that certain things which you propose are wrong, or they know what will work and will not work. And so the practitioner might be superior to the theoretician in many cases where standard solutions are needed. They know from their experience this works, or no, this has no chance. you should respect that. Um, so, because that a person who knows how things are done knows this will work or this will not work, that is not wrong just because that person can't explain the reasons why it is. Sorry for a short interruption. Had just been interrupted by somebody at the door. But now I have to go on, or we can go on. So please, that a certain person who is well familiar with practical things does not know the reasons why something works, that does not make his or her solution wrong. So that is what you always must keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah? So this is number one. The people who know how it works very often don't know why it works, but it works. And the second thing, very often the practitioner has a good feeling that the things which you propose will fail. And again, the practitioner can probably not give reasons for that, at least not reasons which stands an academic review or your critique. But nevertheless, they might be right. So whenever you see that there is a discrepancy between what you expect and what experienced people say, be cautious, try to understand, then show your ability to be a theoretician. Choose a really theoretical approach. Look and try to understand why that person made the experience that this will go wrong. No? Form an idea, try to understand why it is possible that somebody made the experience that what you regard as right is regarded as wrong by them. Until you don't understand that, that is probably still a reason to be very, very cautious, because your idea is only from looking and their experience is from doing. Naturally, when you later then fully can understand what's going on, then you will be able probably to generate new ideas on which that practitioner never came. When you know why certain things work and other things don't work, or under which conditions some things would work, which never worked until now from the experience of the practitioner, because he or she practiced under different conditions. If you then can understand that, that would really be then a great achievement. So respect the knowledge of the people who didn't study but know how it can be done. So try to improve your understanding. There is an old kind of a joke which I got from an unknown German comedian. I just came across it somewhere. A good theoretician is a person who can demonstrate to a practitioner that what the practitioner successfully did just a minute ago can never have really worked, and in the end managed to convince that practitioner. That's a risk for you. If you can convince other people too well from things which are nevertheless imperfect knowledge, an imperfect view and model of reality that could go wrong deeply. There are even some examples from history. We had in Germany the famous Emperor William II, our last emperor, and he is said to have been a relatively intelligent man, and he liked, at least I read this about him, he liked to argue very convincingly on a theoretical basis. Now, when it came to disputes between him and his subordinate diplomats, then their ideas on diplomacy relied on practice, and he had some theoretical ideas because he was, or had been for a long time, rather a bystander to politics. So he had some nice superficial ideas on how things should be done. The diplomats had only a practical knowledge, and now in the end he could talk their ears off in a way that in the end they were willing to believe him. The result was well known. German diplomacy ended up with causing World War I, and in the end the emperor found himself dethroned and sitting in Dutch exile. So if you have a higher position in hierarchy, arguing convincingly but wrongly on an imperfect theoretical basis can even be highly dangerous for all people involved. So always keep in mind, theory is never perfect. Try to find out what you don't yet understand, where your theory deviates from real life, and then try to make your understanding, your theoretical model, your idea of reality more and more comprehensive. Good. Yeah, so learn for life that your first idea is usually not true. Learn for life that something which sounds okay might still overlook a part of reality which might be important, at least in some cases, and keep an open mind and never believe things which you read in a book. The wrong books, or which you hear or in a video. If you are really good and have really understood what I'm talking about, then you naturally also don't trust me blindly, but you check everything. Can it comply with what you know about life and logic? Good. In the end, naturally, when you do theoretical approaches, then in the end that might help you more to find new solutions or new ideas, because that is something which a practitioner just from experience can probably not generate so easily. When you have the understanding of an idea of how things might really work, then you might also conceive ideas of what also might then work. And that is then in the long run the advantage of a theoretical approach, and that is why we insist on training users. Good. Good. In the end, still one thing which I want to give you on your way during your whole studies, you can naturally develop a theoretical understanding and so, but sometimes there are certain things which you simply must learn. For example, what a definition means, a generally accepted one. You cannot, with logic or so, you cannot analyze, you cannot just develop an own idea of what accounting is, tax is, credit is, or so. That would be highly awkward. If there is a general understanding where all people agree on, you must know it, and you must be able to define it and memorize it. So if my name is Schmidt or Müller or Schulze, that is something which cannot be determined arbitrarily. That is just fixed. So you would have to learn that. So whenever there are technical terms in an academic discipline, you just have to learn it. And if there are different definitions which are currently used by different people, you should be familiar with the fact that the definitions used by the experts deviate, and must be able to find out what it's about. Now, a new point. We said that business administration has to do with the art of choosing or making the right decisions. So, naturally, a manager, a good manager, is somebody who makes the good decisions, and the bad managers are the ones who make the bad decisions. And the good managers should be promoted, should be highly paid, rewarded, and the bad ones should be fired. Now, one of the most decisive questions is therefore, what is a good decision and what's a bad one? Now, naturally, the most naive idea will be a decision is good if the outcome is good. And the answer is not necessarily. The opposite could also be true. Let's just think about it. For example, somebody speculates in the stock exchange. Cannot explain why, just gambles around. So, began with 1,000 euro, ends up with 100 million euro. And if you ask him or her, what was your investment strategy? Your investor answers, well, I always bought the stocks, the shares in companies which had more than 3 letters A in the name. Now, was it a good decision, or was that something which relied on pure coincidence? We have the probably remote suspicion somewhere in the back of our minds that this might be coincidence. Now you would say, aha, if it were mere coincidence, how can such a person end up with 100 million? And the answer is, well, if there have been 1,000 million people gambling around the stock exchange, then there must be, just by the rules of coincidence, just by statistical rules, there must be one who is always right. Because every time when you make a decision there to invest, it can either succeed or go wrong. So you have, let's say, if you invest 60 times after another, you have probably 1 million combinations or even more. And so if 1 million people gamble around there just by arbitrary decisions, one or so will be successful every time. That's just coincidence. So would not be a good decision. I would not trust my money to that person, because I have no guarantee that the next investment is successful again or goes wrong. So we must think about what can determine it, or what are the factors which enable us to find out what a good decision is. And we can agree, or there is a general agreement, that there are 3 determining factors for a decision at all. First, if a decision is good or bad depends on the aims which you want to reach. For example, if I want to lead a safe life, it's definitely not a good decision to jump down the Eiffel Tower. Plain and evident for everybody. Now, if you want to suicide yourself, it might be evaluated completely differently. So if a decision is good or bad depends on the aims. First, the second thing is, a decision implies that you have an ability to choose. There is no decision if there is no choice. So you need to know the alternatives, or you need to be able to choose between alternatives. Otherwise, we cannot speak of a decision. And now, naturally, before you decide, you should analyze the alternatives which you have. And then, ladies and gentlemen, naturally, you can already form an idea if a decision can be good or bad if somebody didn't even bother to make a kind of inventory of all the available alternatives, but just did the first thing which came to his or her mind. Then this is not a very careful way of deciding. So we would probably think it's not really guaranteed that the best decision was taken. And then, well, if you have different alternative activities which you can choose from, different actions, then you should evaluate or you must be able to evaluate the outcome of your actions which you choose, with regard to your aim, not with regard to other factors, because if you want to maximize the result with regard to your aim, you must know the results, or at least be able to prognostice the result, the outcome of the different activities from which you can choose. And that determines the decision process. Without an aim, no decision is possible. Without knowledge of alternatives, no decision is possible. And if you just have activities, but you don't know what could be the result of these activities, then you have no way to decide. So who has no alternatives cannot decide. Yeah? The best classical joke is God created Eve and then ordered Adam, choose a wife. That's not really a choice. One wife available. Nevertheless, you see, the beginning of the Bible, at least in that popular simplification, contains some sense of humor. So that's not really a choice. The same would have been if your parents say, you can choose every university which you like, but go to Kleve. And there is only one university at Kleve, so no alternative, no decision. The next thing is, if you want to make a reasonable and rational decision, then you must get an overview over the range of the possible alternatives. So you must take into account all possible available alternatives, leaving out all alternatives which are not existent in real life. It might cause too much effort to list all the alternatives to find them all out, or it might take too much time to find out all available action alternatives. So you might cut the process down and restrict yourself to the probably most relevant alternatives, but that would then require that you do this in a reasonable way. They can give reasons for why you leave which activities out of the scope of your the scope of the things which you inventorize or which you take into consideration. The most important thing here is, in brackets, leaving out all the alternatives which are not possible. That is something which is, for example, difficult for children and sometimes for a certain type of grown-up people. They want to choose alternatives which do not exist in real life. This usually in the dispute begins with, but I want that my two neighbors live in peace with each other. The answer is, well, this is no possible action which you can take. It's probably not a realistic alternative if the two insist in quarreling constantly. But I want that I have success. And the answer is, how? I want to have my cake and eat it at the same time. Not possible. So very often you see that people are not satisfied with the alternatives which they have, and they insist in dreaming of additional alternatives which have one bad disadvantage: they do not exist in reality. And that would be a major fault, or a fatal fault. Dreaming about alternatives or dreaming of consequences which these alternatives shall have, but which they will not have. So you must base your decision on an analysis of the alternatives which really exist. And you also must base the evaluation of the actions which are available on the consequences which these activities will have, and not of the consequences which you want them to have. Good. The next thing is, it's not possible not to choose. Very often you have that also, that people don't like the alternatives and then say, no, I refrain from that. Doing nothing is naturally always one of the alternative actions. So this is a part of the range of alternative activities which you can take and choose from. So doing this, doing that, or doing nothing, that's always alternative 3. And when it comes to evaluating the consequences here, then naturally you will evaluate what's the consequences of action 1, what's the consequence of action B, and what's the consequence of action C. So of not doing anything actively, there are foreseeable consequences of that alternative. And so if you decide, if you don't do something, then you decide for the consequences of that non-activity, and you are fully responsible for that. For example, it might be that you are a boss of a firm and the firm has a big crisis. Somebody tells you, if you dismiss 500 of the 2,000 workers, then there is a realistic chance that the other 1,500 workers can keep their job permanently. On the other hand, if you don't dismiss anybody, then the 2,000 can just go on working for the next month, but then there is a high probability, or then it's nearly guaranteed, just to simplify matters, then it's guaranteed that the firm will be bankrupt in 1 year, and then that all the jobs will be gone. Now it might be that both alternatives are alternatives which you don't like. I don't want to fire people and make them jobless. On the other hand, I don't want to become bankrupt. So it might be that you say, then I do nothing. Well, that would be deciding for I let things go their way, and let things go their way would in most likelihood lead to bankruptcy, and all of them lose their job. But then you say probably, that was not my fault, I did nothing. But the thing is, yes, you did something. You did choose the alternative not to act, not to save the situation, and so you are involved as one of the causes of the course of events. So that was your decision not to change the situation. The action, the alternative which you opted for, doing nothing, had already programmed the outcome that all the jobs were lost and the firm went bankrupt. So you did choose at that moment. You lived in the illusion that you did nothing and therefore were not responsible. But you choose not to do anything. That was your choice, and it was probably not the best choice. Now it depends on your aim. If, for example, your aim was not to achieve the best results for your firm and your workers, but your aim was not to be viewed critically by others, not to be hated by others, then probably the decision to do nothing and let the firm bankrupt without that somebody can reproach you that you have done something bad, and that is probably the best strategy. So if you want to have white hands and the fate of the others doesn't count for you, then the optimal decision is probably different from the decision which you take if you want to save as many jobs as possible. Naturally, real life is not so simple, but you see where I'm insisting on. It's not possible not to choose when you come to a decision which is to take. So you have to choose, and you have to choose from the alternative which really exists. A typical mistake for children is choose one of the two sweets. Okay, I take both of them. So that alternative is no alternative which daddy or mommy allowed. Now, if you manage to convince daddy and mommy that you can then get the two sweets, then it's a very promising strategy, but in real life, with the grown-ups, that is not always a strategy which is successful. There people usually say, choose the one alternative or the other. And to say, I want to get both is usually not negotiable. And, well, if it's not other people, but if it's reality, the world, then very often it's simply physically impossible to achieve both contradictory aims. So you must choose alternatives which are possible. The range of possible activities, so your alternatives, might, by the way, change within the course of time. It might be that certain alternatives fall away just due to the course of time. So to postpone a decision might change the range of alternatives. For example, when I think about if I should celebrate my 30th birthday or not, and invite 200 guests or not. If I postpone this decision, I'm not sure if I should do it or not, so I do nothing and think about the situation again and again and again. And if then later my 30th birthday is already past for, let's say, 7 or 8 months, then the alternative to invite guests on my 30th birthday is no longer available. So the decision has been strongly simplified. You have let yourself being decided by circumstances, not always a recommendable idea. But you must keep in mind, waiting can change the range of available alternatives naturally. For example, shall I finish my studies successfully after 7 years with a low grade, or after 9 years with a high grade? That's no longer possible to choose the first alternative if you are already in semester number 8. That is something which you must see. And it very often really explains problems which people have. Because sometimes people, for example, have a semester where they are not so well, and they don't perform and learn so well, so they can't take all the exams of that semester, and later they say, well, I want to get finished in the minimum time, and very often this is no longer an available alternative. So then they get more and more frustrated, because if the aim is no longer realistic, there will be no realistic alternative from which you can act, and so you will spend enormous time over a senseless decision. An unreachable aim has no possible activity, so trying to choose the optimal activity can only make you depressive. Naturally, you have to select the best alternative based on the consequences it will probably have for your aim. If the consequences are not clear, you will have to find them out and make a prognosis. Usually that is necessary, because the consequences of your intended activities will be in the future, and you don't know the future. So it's always a matter of probability. Now, when can your decision be criticized for being a bad one? Well, if you just prognostize consequences of an alternative in a careless way or in a way which is clearly wrong, then this would be a mistake in your decision-making process. And if there is uncertainty, so you have to expect, or it can be that one activity can generate either the one or the other consequence. Then you have to make your mind up if you can live with that possible set of alternative outcomes. So you will have to evaluate the probability of the outcomes and to make clear to yourself the preferences if you want to have a low-risk decision or a high-risk decision with high chances. So which strategy and which risk you are going to take. But nevertheless, a careful decision process would require that you make the potential consequences clear to you, and that you then decide based on the consequences of the alternatives which are available. And naturally, if several consequences are possible of an activity, you cannot say, I opt for this activity only under the condition if it brings the favorable outcome. You can only opt for all the potential consequences together. So if you have to decide if you take part in Russian roulette, and if you survive, you get a payment of 5,000 euro. You have a probability of 5 on 6 that you get the payment of 5,000. And with a probability of 1/6, you will shoot yourself to death. So you can't opt for taking part in winning. It's the only viable alternative is you have to accept all the potential outcomes. So you might win 5,000, but you also might lose your life and die. It's not possible to separate artificially the consequences of that activity. Both potential consequences are chosen by you, and so if you accept the risk to die, you would have some very good reasons for that. You can only opt for the bundle of all potential consequences. So you can't ignore the possibility of outcomes which you don't like. Actions must be evaluated according to the consequences which they will bring, and not according to the outcome which you would most like. So that requires that a good decision-making process requires that you make familiar yourself with reality and what is going to happen outside there. So you require knowledge about what's going on in reality. And that is why, if you study business administration, you must make yourself familiar with many things about what really happens in the outside world. So knowing about legal aspects, what are the legal consequences if I make a contract? Where can I set up a factory, where not? What are the decisive factors for what consequences are combined with placing a factory in the Bahamas, and what consequences will it have if I base a factory somewhere near the German-Dutch border? So you must learn about real circumstances. So what is technically possible, what are legal framework conditions, and so on. Sometimes you can limit the range or narrow down the range of possible alternatives which you can look on, or which you want to choose from, by restrictions which you choose. For example, Russian roulette, every alternative which carries the risk of death, even if it is improbable or not highly likely, is excluded from I would never accept this, then decision gets highly simplified, or um, you might say illegal choices are excluded. This is for most people reasonable limitation of the range of activities or of alternatives which you can choose. In some areas, it is said that this is not always the case. For example, might be mafia that they would probably smile about that restriction, but in normal business, it's clear that you limit yourself to legally allowed things. By the way, when it then comes to international business, to inform yourself about potential legal restrictions in your own country and also in all other countries involved, that might bring along a huge effort to obtain all that information. Good. To speak again about the last aspect, you cannot judge or make a decision without having aims or preferences. So things which you want to achieve, you must make clear to yourself what you want to achieve. You cannot judge the quality of a decision when you don't know what the deciding person wanted to achieve. No? There is something which I came across in a TV special TV contribution some years ago, 10 or 15 years ago. I stumbled across that theory. There was somebody who got the task to form an opinion about Julius Caesar's last days. Julius Caesar spent his last months of life in Rome, and you know he was murdered on the 15th of March, the Ides of March in Rome, in the year of 44 before Christ. And the assassination attempt, that was the interesting thing, was always announced to him by informants. He got several warnings from different people in advance, and they all ignored them. For example, when he died, or when he had been murdered, one detected he had got 20 letters in that day, and he passed on 19 to his secretary, and one was found on his dead body, and that contained a warning that he was going to be murdered or should not go to the Senate this day. Now, naturally, the contemporarian people said, strange behavior, very bad. Don't know what can have motivated Caesar to act so strangely. The man was usually a high-level politician, good at deciding, so why did he have so bad days? Evidently, everything which had to do with his assassination, all these warnings, all that was ignored. Really bad mistakes were made, and not only one, but many. So contemporary persons really were puzzled by the course of events. And so that looked like very bad choices done by Caesar. And now in that TV series contribution, which I don't remember where it was from, some police officer of today was asked to investigate into Caesar's assassination, and he came up with a very interesting theory. He said, well, the man wanted to get killed in a way which saved his face. It was a kind of covered suicide. He used his political opponents to get rid of them. Now imagine that was his aim, and everything he did in the time before was not a bad decision, but excellent. If his plan was to survive, then ignore all these warnings was extremely stupid. A chain of extremely bad decisions. Now, if his aim was completely different, to get killed by others, but in a way that he did not get the reputation of being a suicidal person, but a hero who had been assaulted by his political opponents, and to get an immortal reputation by that, then that would all have been an activity, a choice of nearly devilish cleverness. And I don't know, that has not become the majority view among historians, but it was at least a surprising interpretation. Naturally, nobody knew his aims. Might be that he was sick and feared to become an invalid also. There are indications in literature of the time that his health was deteriorating. But nevertheless, you see that depending on which aim the guy had, his decision strategy was either extremely stupid or nearly devilish clever. And so sometimes knowing about the aims enable us to form a completely different opinion of if a decision was good or bad. So, yeah, you have also to keep that into consideration. By the way, that's sometimes the way how psychologists try to analyze your behavior. If your behavior is really strange, then they sometimes begin to think about your subconscious aims. For example, why is the studying time of a certain person taking so long, although that person usually is very intelligent? That enlarge the studying time more and more. And so that person can not yet take up a job. Well, if the subconscious aim of that person might be, I don't want yet to take up a job, it would be an excellent strategy. And so one could sometimes think about or reflect about one's aims. And if you fear, for example, having to live independently on your own, that might be a strategy. Good. Good. Now that is naturally only a very, very simple introduction to what is deciding about. And if you want to inform yourself about the difficulties and all the things which are combined with decision making, then I can recommend the English translation of a book of a former academic teacher of mine, of Mr. Eisenführ, together with Mr. Weber and Langer. Rational Decision Making has been published in Springer Publishing House. And there you can first get an introduction, and then you can really deeply work yourself into all the pitfalls of decision making, and then in the end you will know where in real life or in practice we very often do things which are contradictory or which cannot sufficiently be justified by logic. So highly recommendable, really a good thing, and you should have a look at that. Again, from the very short introduction series from our Oxford University Press, far more cheap, but also far more abstract. Naturally, libraries are recommendable. Good. So, if we put that all together, then we see that by definition, enterprise has to generate income, and that business administration, if a business wants to generate income by definition, then the aim of a business, the only aim which every business must have in common, will be generating income. Not because that's given by nature or God, but only because we define the institution business as an institution which should have the aim to generate income. And then one of the things which we can agree on if we analyze businesses is that they should generate income and that they should do it in the best way, so to maximize income. But that is not something which must be under all circumstances. It just followed from as we have defined businesses. Naturally, a good business can also follow other aims. But if it not follows the aim to generate income, then by definition, it's no longer a business, but a non-profit organization. So if people insist that business must have the aim to maximize profit, that just follows from the definition. They should have the aim to make income. And if that's their aim, then the best decision is always that which maximizes the outcome for the aim. So it's rather a tautological thing which is always true under the circumstances, that a business should maximize income. In real life, very often business have additional or prevailing other motives. So one should not always say every institution in real life must have only one aim, maximize income. That's just something which follows from the definition. Good. So from our theoretical approach, and it's highly questionable if the sheer maximization of profit always leads to the best course of events in real life. Good. Some things you should keep in mind already, that, for example, the technical terms, income, that's defined as revenue minus expense. Revenue is what, when you become richer. Expenses, if you spend money or comparable things, so you get poorer. Or income can also be defined as increase of your property during a certain period. Also, terms like business, household, objectives, alternatives, consequences should be kept in mind. So consequently, business administration should deal with how the best decisions can be made about generating income just by how we define that thing. Then we may have to make ourselves familiar with the kind of decisions which have to be taken in a business, and we must be able to form a sufficient overview of the possible outcomes of the alternatives. Now, I just already told you, if you say some institution has the aim to generate income, then a good decision should aim at the maximum outcome, so at the maximum income, and you can directly derive from that the so-called economic principle that if you want to make the best decision, that nothing should be wasted. The economic principle has two forms. First, it can mean that with a given input, your aim should be to maximize your output, or that if your aim is to reach a given output, that then you should minimize the input. So, for example, concerning your studies, if you say, I want to get finished in 7 semesters, and I want to finish with the maximum possible grades which I can achieve during that 7 semesters. Then you have a given output, a given input, and you want to maximize the output which you can reach with that effort. On the other hand, it could be your aim that you say, I want just to pass every exam at the lowest possible level. So Then you have a given output, just want to pass, and then your aim is to minimize the input. I want to spend most of my time lazy on the couch and the sofa, and want only to do that work which is unavoidable. Also be an economic approach, not a recommendable one, by the way, but that would also be a strategy. I want the output is fixed, which I want to reach, but I don't want to waste resources. I want to invest the least possible safe amount of work. Both things are possible. What's never possible is the combination of both. To maximize the output with minimum input, because that would mean indefinite outcome with zero input, and that will not work. You can't minimize and maximize both factors. One must be given. That's something where you can trick all beginners or outsiders with, that you say, well, economic behavior means minimum input with maximum output. No, not possible. Minimum input is zero, maximum output is everything, hundreds of millions, and that does not work. You need to have some input to generate something. Good. Now, if you want to generate income, income is by definition becoming richer. Now, one cannot become richer if you don't interact with other people. You get that additional property, which is income from the outside world. So that requires contact with the outside world. So you must think about your surroundings, the position of your enterprise in the overall society. So usually an enterprise motivates others to give things to you, your income, in return for things which you do for them. So you must produce things or services or offer them to others. So you see an enterprise somewhere in the middle of society. They produce products and services and sell them to the market. So you need a market. And in order to produce something, you also need some input, and that input must come from somewhere. So you will have to look to the outside world as a market for raw material, for the personnel which you want to employ, and so on. And so you will have to think about, where do I get my raw material from? Supply, market. You will have to ask yourself, how can I transform my raw material into my final product? So question will be, how do I organize production? And how can I motivate customers to buy? So you already have to think about marketing. Already from that basic analysis, you can see there are three fields with which you have to deal in order to manage an enterprise. Then you also have to deal with money. You must have money to pay your suppliers, your employees. You also have to get that money from your customers. And the suppliers usually must be paid earlier than your customers. You get your money from your customers. So there is a time gap between the payments which you have to make for your raw materials and the payments which you get for your products. That gap must be managed and closed, and so you need a finance management, naturally. Furthermore, you have to do with other relations with the outside world, for example, with the state, and the state requires tax payments, social security payments, insurance payments probably happen. You have to deliver statistics, to deliver other information, and so on. Balance sheet obligations, all that must be dealt with. You will have to organize the things which happen in the firm, and you have to deal with personnel, so human relations also play a role. And Also, you have to decide on how you organize the enterprise in a legal way, because there are different legal forms how you can set up an enterprise. That's a very long-term decision. You can't change it every minute. So you must choose, for example, in which legal form you organize your enterprise. All this must be known. Then you place your factory or your offices at a certain place in the real world. So which consequences will that have? Which places can you choose from? All that must also be known. So that gives you an overview about all the things which you have to be busy with when you want to think about the decisions which have to be taken in the course of a business. Um, Foreseeing the consequences of your alternative requires some planning. So you have also to think about what's a good planning process and what does management, so the process of choosing, of making sure that you take the right decisions, what does that all imply? You must fix your aims, you must plan, so analyze the alternatives and decide which alternatives you want to choose. So deciding if you don't do anything on your own, you must organize how your decisions are transposed or transformed into real activities. And in the end, it is recommendable to control if the outcomes which you prognosticized, which you expected from your actions, really took place. And if something went wrong, where the mistake was, so to improve the next planning cycle. So planning or management is in a certain way a constant circle of activities. You always check the outcome and then try to improve the process the next time. Okay. This shall be enough for today. This is end of chapter 1. I hope you survived it easily, and I thank you very much for attending and listening to this first lecture. Thanks very much.